everybody. Welcome to the Standing Light podcast. Today, we are shining a light on Tom Cronin, and I am so excited. Tom Cronin is a renowned speaker and corporate meditation and mindfulness trainer, recognized nationally and internationally for his classes and programs as a leadership expert. Often known as the King of Calm, Tom is recognized for his inspiring, empowering, and humorous presentations on leadership, stress management, mindfulness, and empowerment. He has spent 26 years as a broker, trading swaps and bonds on international finance markets, and also spent 25 years studying Eastern philosophy, spirituality, meditation, and mindfulness. He has a unique capacity to blend those two worlds in his inspiring and moving presentations. He is also the producer and co-writer of the amazing documentary, The Portal, an immersive cinematic experience that answers the question, how can we really change the world? Welcome, Tom. I am so excited to have you on the Standing Light podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along so much today.
So I want to just dive right in because I remember I watched The Portal, and then a few days later, as the field and the synchronicity would have it, I think you populated as a recommendation on Facebook for me to connect with. And I was so flashed. And then we immediately got into a beautiful conversation. And I remember you asking me just a more heartfelt question, which doesn't usually happen when you connect with somebody instantly on those portals. So I really appreciate your beautiful heart. And I'm so excited to really speak more to that. And you shared how the heart, in a sense, is the portal. I remember you talking about that. So I would love to hear how you got to where you are now and ultimately what your portal moment was.
Yeah, where I am now is, like you said in the bio, teaching meditation and wanting to spread that message across the world. But it's been quite a journey to get to this place, and we all are in this process of what we're becoming. And so many years ago, I was a badass trader on the trading room floor, and a lot of, I guess, narcissistic, hedonistic tendencies that is rife in that industry. And the wonderful thing about the universe, about nature, this natural law that we're part of, that it continually is guiding us into a more evolved way of living. And of course, the challenge is most of us just ignore that, like I did. And when we ignore it, what happens is that communication from natural law, from the universe, it just gets louder and louder and louder. And it creates more and more extreme, uncomfortable experiences until we start to adapt and change. And there's this wonderful quote, suffering is proportional to our resistance to change. And I had immense levels of suffering because I was incredibly resistant to change. And so this suffering got worse and worse and worse until eventually extreme levels of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, insomnia, agoraphobia, literally a nervous breakdown had occurred in my life as a broker at the age of 29. And what it was in Sanskrit, it's called a rashi, which is a cataclysmic event that means that the current trajectory that we're on is unsustainable and actually has to stop. And what it means is there's a fork in the road now. When we get to a fork in the road, it means only one of two directions can happen, but not the current direction. Because we either go one way or the other way, which is break down or break through. We can't continue on in the current trajectory that we're on. And so that's when relationships either go through divorce or they go to the next level, or a company goes into bankruptcy or it goes to the next level, or a civilization gets wiped out or they go to the next level. And so for me, that rashi arrived at 29, and that was like a really sort of a major turning point in my life where I was faced with kind of suicidal tendencies. I really, was contemplating whether I could continue on with the life that I was living, or even if I wanted to. And that was when I came across meditation, and it was really quite an interesting synchronized event by the universe. I was watching a documentary about a property developer, and it was all about his success. I had agoraphobia at this point, was living at home, couldn't go to work, and was watching a bit of free-to-air TV because there was no internet back then. And there was a story about a property developer and how successful he was. And there was this tiny section in that story, remarkably about 2 minutes of it in a 1-hour documentary, about how he used a particular style of meditation called transcendental meditation. Now, there's two things that happened here. While he was talking, they showed him in a pinstripe suit meditating. And I was like, whoa, he's wearing a suit and meditating. It's like, cool, I wear suits so I could meditate. And it was really like this epiphany moment of accessibility to something that I'd never really considered. He was sitting in a chair. He wasn't in lotus. He didn't have his hands in mudras. He, it was very, very accessible. But secondly, they used the word transcendental, and I really liked this sound of this word. It was really quite compelling. I'd been using a lot of drugs up until then. I really enjoyed that sort of, I guess, transcending experience that happens when we do things like ecstasy, speed, cocaine. And so for me, this idea of being able to reach some state in meditation was really, really compelling. And maybe it was a bit of seeking or chasing, but it didn't really matter. What it did was it inspired me to do something unique that I'd never done before. So that was when I got out the phone book, started looking up different meditation centers in Sydney. We didn't have Google back then. And so I just started exploring meditation, Eastern philosophy, and mindfulness. And that was really the start of my journey. And just to cut that journey short, in the storytelling, is that I learned to meditate. It was a game changer. It changed my life very, very quickly. The addictions, the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, the agoraphobia literally just melted away within days and weeks. And went back to work and continued on in that job for 16 more years.
Wow. That's an incredible journey. And what inspired you then to really, because you were still in finance, I assume, and you continued on, but what was then that?
It wasn't like I just became an enlightened monk. It's not like, it's just this gradual peeling back of layers, gradually getting less stressed, less overwhelmed, more calm, more joyful. And it took time, and I went deep into my studies. There's a saying, when you keep pulling back the bow, the string on the bow, the further back you pull it, then when you let it go, it goes hard and fast. And so I kind of spent a lot of time in my studies, a lot of time in developing my own consciousness. And then it just, over time, became more and more compelling. I mean, there's a couple of factors. I had, kids and mortgage, and there was a financial, level of commitment that I was obligated to with the family. And becoming a meditation teacher is not the greatest career move financially. So, there was definitely some things that needed to attend to there and set myself up a little bit, but also just taking my time with that level of study and having a deep sense of trust and faith in my capacity to share this technique with the world. But I became very, very inspired over time, more and more, as I started referring more and more people to other teachers. I just felt compelled to become a teacher myself. So the first step was to become a teacher and teach part-time. And I was doing that for a year or two. And then eventually it just became very apparent and unconditional that I just had to make this leap into becoming a teacher, coach, and speaker. And that's when I made that step into full-time.
Mm-hmm. I love how you spoke about, it took time, because so many of us, we see these success stories, right? And we don't understand the reverence, the humility that we get to go through to then take those layers, down ultimately, or let spirit melt those layers away, in a sense, through that process of trust ultimately, right? And it is that shift from the head into the heart. And I would love to hear how that kind of unfolded for you, because I think that's at the core of it all, right? But we talk about meditation, and a lot of people think that it's a very mindfulness thing and a heady thing, and then they don't know how to kind of let go of that, right? How do you explain meditation? How do you kind of get yourself or experience those transcendental states?
Yeah, there's so many layers to this, exploration into meditation. Firstly, there's very different types of meditation. We've got to understand that, some like mindfulness and visualization and gratitude and chakra clearing. I like the method of meditation that uses primordial vibrations or mantras that are what we call transcending mantras. So they're mantras that take the mind beyond. To transcend means to go beyond. Mm-hmm. So what happens in this particular state is that we get into such a level of depth in our meditation very quickly, within 5 to 7 minutes sometimes. And what happens in that state is that we go beyond the level of thought, beyond the level of feeling, and beyond the level of physicality or locality. And so what happens in that moment is we've got a physical, mental, and emotional body, but they're just an apparatus. It's just your vessel or your vehicle. It's not you. Now, most humans identify themselves as their thoughts, their feelings, and their physicality, the way they look, the way they feel, and the way they think. But that's actually just the mechanism for them to experience this plane of earthly existence in as consciousness moves through those three layers, those three vessels. So we have a higher self expressing through the lower self being thoughts, feelings, and physicality. And so to transcend those three layers of identity and to experience myself beyond the physical, mental, and emotional, but to experience myself as consciousness itself. So not limited to a locality, not limited to a space, not limited to a form of thought, feeling, or physicality, but to experience myself as consciousness or awareness or presence itself. And that there becomes, the magic. That's where, our human experience really starts to come to the fore. So as beautiful as a lot of meditations are, and I do a lot of different styles of meditation depending on the particular, thing that I'm requiring at that point in time. But my core practice that I do on a daily basis and have done for 26 years is the transcending practice. And the beautiful thing about that is that it takes us beyond that limitation of what it is to be human, beyond the conditioning, the coding. And it really gives us access to the unchangeable aspect of ourself, the unruffable aspect of ourself. This is what we call spirit. Mm-hmm. And so it's done with a particular mantra that we repeat over and over again inside our head, and it takes the mind away from the external world of form and phenomenon, away from the world of time and space, and it takes us into that state of transcendence. So that's really, when we talk about the portal, it's one of the things that is really what the portal is going through that realm of transcendence. Now here's the magic. When we go into that space, the mind becomes very, very quiet. There's no more thoughts. And so when we don't think, what happens is there's another form within us that's a communication system, and that's the heart. And so the heart is always there. It's always radiating. It's always, it's always emitting love, and it's always experiencing love. It's just that when we have a very, very busy mind and a very, very stressed nervous system, it kind of drowns it out. It's almost like listening to a Beethoven sonata, but you've got Metallica blaring full bore on 10 in your sound system. And so it just drowns it out and you just can't hear it, right? And so we're walking around with this beautiful Beethoven sonata playing inside of us, but we can't hear it because there's all this Metallica playing. Not that there's anything wrong with Metallica, but just using it for the analogy, guys.
That is brilliant. I love that so much. And I'm so happy you spoke to that because, funny enough, by the way, just the other day, I was at Maharishi's center here in Switzerland. He opened his center. He's obviously passed since, but to be in that space where for, I don't know, from the 60s on already, he was forming the global government of enlightenment there. And it was a research center for TM, for transcendental meditation. And it was just incredible to be in there and feel the energy as well. So it's very close to my heart now to have been in there and really felt it as well and understand it a little bit more deeply. And also just, I've been a meditator for over 10 years myself, and understanding that, once we let the mind shift and almost drop into the heart and become heart-minded, that's when we get to transcend ultimately. And you said it so beautifully. And I just got this visual and image of really the mind being this kind of field of its own. And then at first existing around the head, but then it ultimately slowly drops down into the heart, which is unity consciousness. And the electromagnetic field of the heart just like blasts that mind beyond this field of awareness and into the quantum. And that's where, as you said, also, the magic happens, those miracles take place where you go so beyond the physical and into that subtle realm of existence, where that's where the real fun takes place.
Yeah. And look, we've got a world, unfortunately, that is really prioritizing that top heavy thinking state.
Right. Exactly.
So, all our emails, all our podcasts, all our books, all our Netflix or Spotify, everything's listening, talking, or thinking. So listening, talking, thinking is pretty much what we dominate our lives with, and that's all just here in the cranium. So it's causing us to really move our attention, move our priorities up here, and that's becoming more and more so. Even Descartes, the French philosopher, said, "I think, therefore I am." So there's this idea that my existence is determined by my thinking. We really prioritize thinking. And that's unfortunately where we're getting so much of the world's pain and suffering from. And what we want to do is really, most of the world's problem is that we just don't have enough enlightened people. And the more enlightened people on the planet, the better the planet's going to be.
What would you say is enlightenment? Or how would you describe an enlightened person?
If you think of the word, just breaking it down, en in French is of, so of light, to be of light. That's to be radiating lovingness, to be radiating kindness, to be radiating consciousness, to be radiating wisdom in your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And of course, it's not just a black and white thing that all of a sudden you're enlightened and that's it. There's degrees of being enlightened, and we can move into an enlightened states and sort of move out of them depending on how much stimulation we are, or how much reaction we're having to the world, how much residual ego constructs are left within the vessel. And so we can have glimpses, we can have stages of enlightenment, we can have states of enlightenment, and that can fade or it can get heightened depending on what we're doing. I'm running a retreat at the moment, so certainly while you're running a retreat, you're eating very pure food, you're only talking about very enlightened sort of subjects, you're in a very closed environment that is not really connecting to the outside world other than this amazing podcast, which is very aligned with what we're doing on the retreat. So that's why I felt comfortable with doing this podcast during the retreat while everyone's taking a break. And so enlightenment really is just this really, and if you think of people that are embodying that state of, it's really about embodiment, not thinking it. It's about really living and breathing it. So Ramana Maharshi and Adyashanti and Muji and, Sri Sri Anandamayi Mara, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, many present and past people have embodied that state where there's such an exudance of luminosity, of radiance, of lovingness and kindness. And it doesn't mean we're just a walkover or, we just let things go by. You could look at people like the Gandhis and the Mandelas and the Jesus Christ of the world that kind of had this sort of almost like a challenger type personality that still managed to, challenge the current status quo a little bit. And we need that in enlightenment as well. It doesn't mean enlightenment just sits around in lotus position and let the world pass by. We can be in action. And this is the really important part of enlightenment, is to actually take the state of enlightenment and move it into action. Mm-hmm. That can be running retreats, or it can be, challenging a political party on some of their policy. These are all important parts of what it is to be enlightened.
Mm-hmm. And doing it from a place of love versus fear.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I've got two beautiful children, loves of my life. And, a boy and a girl, and they're twins. And there was a time when my son was going through a particular stage in teenage years that was quite a challenger personality. He's a beautiful soul. And, if he crossed the boundary line within the house, which is what I really inspired in them. I really inspired them to cross boundary lines and inspired them to push and challenge status quo, systems, authority, because sometimes we might have positions of authority might not be serving us, but might be serving them. Mm-hmm. And so to really question and challenge things within our society. And that, of course, backfires sometimes when you're in a household and he's challenging certain things. But, whenever there had to be some discipline, the boundary would be established and there would be some karmic consequences as a result of their actions, so they could learn from lessons. And it always was followed up with a communication where we would chat about why I was doing this. Now, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And there's a reason why I'm doing this. And I would ask the question, why do you think I'm doing this? And he roll his eyes, goes, because you love me, Dad. I said, 100%. I love you so much. And that's why I'm creating this boundary, because I care for you so deeply. And it's going to be uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for me. But this boundary is established purely out of love. And when they hear that, they know deeply that this is not because they're a bad person. It's not because they're horrible. It's not because I don't like them. It's completely the opposite. And those are important aspects of trying to come from a state of consciousness and living in an integrated world. Traditionally, in the past, people didn't have to worry about these things because they just lived in a monastery. It was easy, right, being enlightened in a monastery. But you try and do it when you've got financial issues and children and partners and all sorts of different things that we have to try and integrate. So this is a whole new frontier that we're in right now, where the masses have the ability to be enlightened and have jobs and have children and have relationships. Mm-hmm. And we've never really been down this territory before. So it's really, we're really pioneering something very new en masse.
It's so true. It's so true. I spent time at Plum Village, which is a Zen Buddhist monastery led by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I was getting ready to leave. And I just had this thought, I am so enlightened. I can't wait. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to spread my light to the whole world. And I took the train back home to Switzerland, and my mother picked me up. And within 5 minutes, my ego practically exploded, and I had a full-on rage. I mean, not quite rage attack, but she just said one thing, and I just lost it. And I was witnessing myself, obviously, from a higher perspective, and thinking, oh my goodness, this is when the journey actually begins. Like, this is the real monastery, right? Is applying it. And it wasn't that I reacted in a horrible way. It just was my ego just wanted to just, go crazy because it got triggered so easily. And it was such an ego blow because I thought I was enlightened, had done all this work. And here I am being so deeply triggered and wanting to react in a, really unenlightened way, and catching myself, realizing and recognizing this is when it begins. This is the true path of enlightenment. When you leave the monastery, when you leave that cocoon, that bubble, and you actually apply it in quote unquote real life. And I think that's what you're speaking to. We all now get to birth enlightenment through us in quote unquote real life, outside of this bubble, outside of the sacred womb, outside of this protected shield and field, but really become these heartists, these heart warriors, light warriors, whatever you want to call it, and band together in that, I don't want to say battle or fight, but really that movement, right?
Mm.
And
there's a beautiful quote from Deepak who said that if you think you're enlightened, go and live with your parents.
Oh yeah. I experienced that first-handed in that moment, big time. Yeah, no, it was a humbling experience.
This is the thing when we become of light, that is to become enlightened, or varying degrees thereof. If you think about where a lamppost is most effective, it's not effective in the daytime, it's effective in the darkness. And so this is the important part of when we find enlightenment. Being in a monastery doesn't really create a lot of change in the world. It can have some effect, there's no question about it. And this is not to disregard people that take that aesthetic renunciant existence, because that state of consciousness that they're in is one of the greatest contributors to the world. Being just one more person, it feeds the field. That's right. It purifies the field. It shifts the field. So there's definitely relevance in that type of existence, but it's even more potent when someone of an enlightened state works in a legal firm, or works in a bank, or works in a real estate agent, or works in a school, and they have an Instagram account. And it's really interesting if you look at some of the previous enlightened beings like Ramana Maharshi and Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Sri Anandamayi Ma. I love the fact that they all have Instagram accounts. It's just so cool, right? Yes. And so that's their ability to continually let the ripple effect of their frequency, their vibration, their radiance, their wisdom continue to percolate and integrate into the world today.
Yeah. And it's true, just standing in your light is not going to necessarily create that bigger ripple effect in the now, potentially. And I got to understand that the spectrum of light is the spectrum, right? On one spectrum is darkness, and on one spectrum is light. And you've got this whole spectrum in between, and not glorifying the light or demonizing dark and living in that duality, but ultimately understanding it's all on one spectrum, and where the light is needed most is in the other space of the spectrum, and vice versa as well, right? Light needs darkness to shine and create that beautiful alchemy of change and ultimately enlightenment, right? And understanding that helped me shift more into that unity consciousness in that sense, right? Where darkness isn't bad, light isn't good. I use this metaphor with a lot of clients where I say, a dragon, like a baby dragon, will spit its fire on everything, on everyone, right? It's just like learning how to use its light. Whereas a mama dragon, she barely ever uses that power, right? That flame, that light. only when truly necessary. And I remember when I was starting the coaching and the therapy journey, I would shine so much light onto my clients, and I would blast them, and it would be too much sometimes. And I didn't know how to fine tune it or just intuit when and how much. It's like the light doctors, right? It's like what's the actual prescription for this person, for this specific individual, because it's a very unique prescription that everybody needs, and you can't just overdose somebody with light or with darkness, as we know. I think when we learn how to really carry that dragon flame in a coherent and truly loving and responsible way, that's when we get to have the most impact.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a beautiful phrase in Sanskrit called Lesha Vidya. Vidya in Sanskrit means knowledge. Avidya is the negation of knowledge, which is ignorance. And Lesha is faint. So we have this faint level of ignorance. So it's about understanding who our audience is and understanding what their needs are. And this is one of the qualities of an enlightened person, is the ability to intuit the need of the time, the right response at the right time. And so we start to, rather than egoically just dump, which is what I've been doing for many, many years, is just a core dump on people, which is just overwhelming them. And it's like someone holds out a thimble and asks for you to fill it up with water, and you pour out a 44-gallon drum. It's going to make a real right old mess. And that's what can happen when we share too much of whatever we have access to. And we can overwhelm people. We can almost repulse them with too much information.
Yeah, because change is scary, right? And people can't understand it on a mental level, but then and then it almost it deters them, as you said. So I think it's a important note, because as so many more come onto the path of enlightenment, right, that discernment, that reverence of this power, which is the most powerful force in existence, love and light, right, to really have reverence of its power and not just abuse it, because just as we can abuse darkness and create really harmful effects with it, that can also happen in the realm of light.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
So I wanted to ask you, because you share this, right, as the kind of topic in the portal, how can we really change the world? I know your answer, but I'm really curious to hear what your answer became after filming that.
It comes down to really one mind at a time, one state of consciousness at a time. It's really just an individual process that gets multiplied by 1, by 10, by 100, by 100,000, by 1 million, by 1 billion. And really, we have immense levels of suffering in the world because the immense levels of ignorance. And when we say ignorance, it's not a hierarchical or elitist type perspective. It's ignorance of our state that is within us, this innate state. And I've been ignorant of it for many, many years and had immense levels of suffering. And as I started to realize what lies within, and it's an ongoing process, like peeling back onion layers, that the more you realize of your innate state, the less suffering we start to have. And the more simpler, less conflicting, more harmonious, certainly not perfect, but certainly less conflicting, more harmonious type of existence we start to have. More health, more vitality. This is really the critical steps, I think, for transformation on the planet, is to just get people to transcend the current code or dogma in their mind, to reduce the amount of thinking, to get them out of the conditioned mindset that we've been operating by, and start to liberate ourselves from the thinking mind and start accessing the conscious mind, the field of mind. And that's when things start to really change dramatically.
I think it's the difference between understanding versus understanding. And you shared that so beautifully with your son. If all parents and teachers taught that way, held space that way, right, where there's that fierce love, we create those sacred boundaries, we really truly teach a child, and it starts there, right? It starts as a parent, it starts as a teacher, where when you help a child truly understand through safety what they did wrong and how they how they can improve, or really also create space for that feedback from them and ask them questions. That's where that transformation takes place. And I feel like for even us adults, we are continuously learning to still understand so many parts of not only just ourselves, but also life itself, because every day is a new adventure. And especially in this world that we're in right now, it's overwhelming. It really is. And it gives us that space to become those great change agents and space holders. But especially for people like us that have chosen this path, but it's also daunting and overwhelming to understand how many people still are so ignorant, because they never got to truly understand themselves and the workings of life itself. And that, I feel, is such a, I can just speak for myself, but that can be a really daunting, overwhelming understanding for me at times.
It's just really a gentle day by day process, for me, just get students meditating. For me, that's my primary objective, is to get people to meditate. And when they start meditating, they start tuning into their body's needs. They start tuning into their external world's needs. They start understanding life a little bit better. It's very gradual and it's very subtle, but it really is one of the starting points. And we start to see them, exploring healthy ways of living, and being more purposeful and being more, I guess, intentional with their time and less distracted. And it's just an ongoing, gradual unfoldment that just is, I'd say to my students, let's just play the long game. We don't need to try to have an expectation that you need to be at some particular destiny within 3 weeks. It's just, there'll be a gradual unfolding, and we trust in that process of natural law. And look, the good thing is, if people don't follow that natural law path, that path of evolution, evolution doesn't go away. It's not like it's just going to ignore them. It's just going to make life more painful, that's all. And that's okay, if that's what needs to take it.
Exactly. There is divine order in it all.
Yeah.
However chaotic it may seem at times. Would you be open to sharing a short meditation with us?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. We could do that.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah. We'll just give our audience just a very simple breath meditation. We won't use a mantra or transcendental meditation practice, but just something that they can take home and will be useful in any times of, not being able to sleep, or feeling a bit agitated, feeling a bit overwhelmed. So it's a very simple practice. Let's just close our eyes and reduce our stimulation with the outside world. And as we sit here in a chair, we notice that there's an effortless breath moving in and out of our body. It's been there, ebbing and flowing in and out from the day we were born, night and day, 24/7. And as it moves in and out of our body, we notice that it passes through the nostrils. And as it's passing through the nostrils, you'll notice that there's a very subtle and very gentle cooling effect around the rim of the nostril. And it's ever so faint. And what we have here is the air brushing the moisture on the skin inside that rim of the nostril. And as the air, like a fan on your skin, brushes that moisture, it cools it ever so faintly inside the rim of the nostril. And our practice here is to continue to keep the awareness on that cool skin around the rim of the nostril. Now at times the mind will get a little bit distracted. It will get a little bit bored, and it will go in search of something a little bit more enticing, a little bit more charming. So our meditation is to not keep the mind still, but to continue to return the mind back to that single point. It's a process and a practice, continuing to bring the mind back to the cool skin around the rim of the nostril. go of the need to be anywhere else, to do anything else, surrendering the future or the past, to stay with that effortless breath, very, very faint breath, cooling the skin around the rim of the nostril. Notice how the mind goes off searching for things more charming. Keep bringing it back, training the mind. And when you're ready, just slowly letting go of the meditation and then opening the eyes. So that was very short, but if you wanted to, you could add 5, 10, 15 minutes to that and you'll start noticing quite a significant effect. Certainly you'll feel a lot calmer in the nervous system, which will allow a restoration and a renovation that will happen within the body down to a cellular level. So definitely something to integrate if you don't have a meditation practice already.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was so beautiful. I hope nobody's doing this while they're driving. We should have given that disclaimer, but
yeah, that's right.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much for taking time out of your retreat and sharing your heart and beautiful mind with us, truly.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along. It's great to connect in with you again.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, we've got some very uncertain times happening. And there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead. The world is changing very rapidly and very dramatically. And what tends to happen is there's a deeply conditioned state of mind in our society that when bad things happen, we feel bad. And when good things happen, we feel good. And we're in this entanglement with the circumstances of life. And there's a beautiful state in Sanskrit called titiksha, which means to be unruffled by the circumstances of life. Give yourself the right and the freedom to not necessarily have to be entangled emotionally, energetically into the circumstances of life. All of our society is set up to be deeply entangled and so to be deeply affected. And that really throws us around and it really twists and turns us emotionally. But there is a state that we can start to sustain, a state of conscious awareness, a state of presence that doesn't have to be entangled. And what I find is that with many people who actually have access to that state, yet still, because of their conditioning, believe that they should be emotionally entangled and they should be having an emotional reaction. If it's authentic and if it's true and it does need to be an emotional expression, that's energy in motion moving through the body, then express that. I will cry if I need to cry. If I need to have an outburst, I'll have an outburst. It's not about denying that movement of energy through the body when it needs to move, but it's also giving yourself the authority and the right to not have to have that emotional response if it doesn't feel that it's arising, and start to look to sustain a state of awareness that is titiksha, to be unruffled and to be in a beautiful state. We call it sakshikutashta, which means the silent witness. And I'm just silently witnessing life move by. And it's a beautiful, fascinating observation that comes from a place of love and from a place of light. And that's really the key to moving through life successfully.
Thank you so much for leaving us with that.
Just a
It
little
makes me,
thing.
it just, no big deal. Oh my goodness, I could speak with you forever. Thank you so much. Truly.
Thank you.
Gracing
Thanks
us
for
with
having
your
me on.
presence. Thank you.